Right now, over 40 million Americans owe more than $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. Yes, you heard me correctly, that's trillion with a T. And I know way too many people, myself included, who've been dealing with these loans a lot longer than we expected. And honestly, we're still trying to figure out how we even qualified for these loans at 17 and 18 years old. But that's besides the point, because after years of student loan pauses and promises of forgiveness, reality is setting back in, and it's about to hit some of us pretty hard if we haven't figured out a way to deal with our loans. So, on today's episode, I'm going to be breaking down how did we even end up in a crisis this big, and what can we do to prepare ourselves for the changes that's about to happen. So, let's get into it. And we'll be back in 3, 2, 1, we gone. Welcome back, family, to another episode of the First Sip Podcast. I'm your host, Dekimbe Smith, and this week I'm sipping on some good old chamomile tea because my anxiety has been getting the best of me, so I'm staying away from caffeine for the time being, right? No more black coffee for right now, maybe in the future, but that's not why we're here. Like I said in the intro, we're here to talk about the recent changes that have been going on with the student loan reporting and how that may impact some of us who, like I said, you might have plans on buying a home in the future, buying a car, or you just might be trying to get your finances in order and don't want this to come up and start ruining your credit, right? So these are things I want to break down today. Like I said, how did we get into a $1.6 trillion crisis? Like, what's been going on over the past couple of decades? Who messed this up? Who gave out all this money to people knowing that we probably won't be able to pay it back? And what can we actually do nowadays to prepare ourselves and get back on the path to repay this debt that we still owe? Or is this just a balloon that's waiting to pop and might crash the economy? I don't know, but let's see how we got here. So back in 1965, President Lyndon Johnson said to Congress that higher education was no longer a luxury but a necessity, and he started urging Congress to create some sort of legislation to expand access to college. Now, obviously, at this time, this was during the civil rights movement, a lot of things going on, right? Racial heat left and right. Everybody was tense. But President Johnson was somebody who was saying, okay, you know what? Let's try to create some sort of programs. Let's try to figure out a way to balance the playing field in some sort of way. So this is something that was created later on that year. Like I said, that created different programs, that gave more federal funding for loans, grants. So people from families that couldn't afford to send them to college were now able to find a way to actually be able to go to these schools. And now at the same time, right, there were some people who didn't agree, right? Back over in California, Reagan, who was the governor, was basically saying, you know what? I don't know why we're actually giving funding for these kids to go to college, right? If they can't pay for it, then they shouldn't be able to go. They don't deserve it. And when they do go, look at what's going on here. There's a whole bunch of socialist beliefs and communist beliefs that are being spread through like wildfire. So we need to figure out a solution for this, right? Now, this is where you started to see Reagan pushing to cut funding to these public institutions while he was still a governor over in California. And then later, once he became president, he continued to push that even on a national level, right? And it was defended by some of his closest advisors. Now, one thing I found interesting was when one of his advisors actually defended his stance on education by saying, we're in danger of producing an educated proletariat. And this was basically when he was saying that, we have to be selective on who we allow to go through to higher education. And over the next couple of decades, that's where we saw more cuts to state funding, public colleges, and, create more and more of a burden on students. Now, another thing I found interesting around the time when Reagan was president was in 1987, something called the Bennett hypothesis came out, right? Now, Bennett was Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Education at the time, and he stated that colleges would raise tuition when financial aid increases, especially subsidized loans, right? Loans that are basically backed by the government. So if you don't pay, the government's got you. And that they offer lower interest rates on. But in other words, he basically said that colleges can continue to raise their prices as long as they know that students can just go ahead and get a loan from the government, right? Why wouldn't you? Okay, let's go ahead and just raise another $5,000. They'll just go ahead and get a loan, and then everything is fine. And he said this is going to continue on and on and on if we don't figure out a way to basically make sure that only the people who basically really, 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 really need it can get access to it. So once again, this just led to more and more cuts towards education over the years while Reagan was in power. Now, since 1980, the cost of tuition has blown up well over 180%. And like I said, this is continuing to create a burden more and more and more on people who are trying to go ahead and get an education, pass high school, but are trying to figure out, how do I continue to pay for these things? And of course, it didn't get any better over the next couple of decades, because now we're starting to see the creation of things like for-profit colleges, and predatory lending, where they really didn't care at all. They said, hey, if you want to go to college, I got a loan for you. And don't even worry about the interest rate. Don't even worry about it. We don't care, because we know you probably don't have a plan to repay this. And the degree that you're going to college for probably won't even pay you enough to repay this within the next 30 years. But go ahead and sign on that dotted line. And here's $50,000 to go ahead and get that degree. And like I said, it was a lot of these schools that popped up. Some of y'all might remember schools like ITT Tech, right? The Art Institute. These were a lot of different institutions that later found out that, okay, they charge crazy tuition rates for degrees that actually never ended up panning out to what they said they were. And there was a lot of sales, a lot of marketing involved. And it wasn't just at these schools, right? This is stuff that started happening at public colleges as well, right? Because they have to keep up, they have to stay competitive with the even bigger institutions, the Harvards, the Yales, right? Who just get, they just get people coming there just based off of the status. So if you're a college, right? If you're a lower college, basically saying, well, how do we keep up our enrollment numbers? How do we keep money coming to us? You got to start doing some things, right? So what do? You increase the marketing, you start investing in some more luxury amenities, and all of this stuff starts increasing the tuition. Oh, and let's not forget about the increase in administrative staff, right? The amount of people that you're hiring, from not only teachers, but now teachers assist, the assistants, the admin, the people who do whatever random job that people find themselves doing at these colleges, because we all know there's a lot of people behind the scenes, right? And when we start asking ourselves how are these people getting paid, obviously it's got to come back to the tuition, right? Where is this money really coming from? And this is something that I've been scratching my head and saying, okay, well, does this eventually stop? How do you get this to stop? Because if the cost of things are going to continue to go up over the next couple of years, and if they're saying, well, you still need an education, where does the competition really come in? Where does the change in pace come from? And this is something I was actually looking at the other day where I'm not sure if you guys saw this, but Palantir actually introduced a program where they said, hey, listen, forget about college, skip all that. If you're still in high school, just come straight to us, right? Here's the basic qualifications that you need. Go ahead and take your SAT. If you get, I believe it was like a 1400, if you get a 1400 on your SAT, and if you have like these technical skills, or at least the ability to learn these things, then we're willing to have you, here, take you through the interview process and bring you on to what they're basically calling like their merit-based internship program, right? You can go there and basically learn everything you need to learn to work for a great company like that. And now imagine that after learning there for 4 years, what company wouldn't take you from saying, okay, yeah, I spent the last 4 years, working and learning at Palantir, right? This is something that I also saw that Apple was talking about doing. And think about these things. This could create a lot of competition for colleges, especially when you can say, who's going to stand out more? The person who comes to the business and says, hey, I've spent the last 4 years right out of high school working for Apple, and I was able to learn X, Y, and Z. Or the person who said, okay, I sat in a classroom and I was able to do these classes and I had a 3.8 GPA. I think the way the future is heading right now, the person who has a real world experience, the one who's able to say, okay, you know what? I actually went out and did these things at a real company, multi-billion-dollar company. They're going to have a lot more to back their resume than the person who just said, no, I spent the time, sitting in a classroom. Unless colleges can figure something out and say, well, you know what? Maybe not. Maybe we can figure out a way to incorporate some sort of, more experience in the actual work field with the actual backing of, the school, with the traditional learning that you get at school, right? Are things that I'm sitting here trying to scratch my head. Like I said, what can be done? Because things have changed, right? I think we all know that less people are going to college over the past couple of years, or at least considering different paths, right? If it's not college, maybe it's a trade school, something else right out of high school that I can do instead of finding myself stuck with tens and thousands of dollars in debt, right? Like what else can I possibly do out there that won't mess up my life for the next 10, 15 years, right? Because when you're stuck with this kind of debt, it's going to impact your ability to buy a home, to start a family, to be able to manage your finances correctly. So like I said, we have to figure out a solution. And that brings us to where we are right now, right? Over the past couple of years, Biden's administration tried saying, okay, we're going to figure out a way to forgive these loans, right? There's a lot of people who are stuck with this debt, and we have to figure out a way to give them new life, to free up their wallets and say, okay, you know what? Don't worry about this debt. Here's a plan for you to get back on forgiveness, whether if you, like I said, I'm not going to dive into the details of those specific plans. If you guys need information on that, I'm going to give you some information towards the end of the episode in a few minutes. But, he was basically saying we're going to create an easier path for repayment for the people who are really burdened with these $200, $300, $400 monthly payments that know they're not going to be able to get out of this debt. And because they're not going to be getting out of the debt, it's going to be showing up on their credit and ruining other aspects of their life. So here we are now, where those promises didn't happen, right? Not everybody was able to get the loan forgiveness, and the people who were able to get some sort of forgiveness, their situations are stuck kind of in limbo because some of them haven't been officially approved and they're still stuck in the courts trying to figure out, all right, what's the next step of this? So like I said, it's a very sticky situation right now where nobody really knows what's going to be happening over the next couple of years. But one thing we do know is that these student loans are going to be reported back on your credit starting next month, right? The time I'm recording this is April, but I'm going to be posting this in probably like first week of May. So this is the time where you need to be going, like I said, to studentaid.gov, see where your current status is for your loans. Are you close to being in default? Are you currently in default? What do you need to do to make sure that you're on some sort of repayment plan if you can't afford that high payment that might kick back in next month, right? Can you get back on something that works better for your income that you're making? There's different ways you can go ahead and apply for what's called like an income-driven repayment plan. Those can, for some people, you may be able to pay nothing on a monthly basis, right? Until you really get back on your feet and you can figure things out. If you're going through some sort of hardship, these are all things that people can talk about. And that's one thing I'm always a big believer in. Like I say, if you're going through a situation, make sure you're talking about it with somebody. Reach out, send the text earlier, send the emails earlier, because it's not going to get any better the longer you wait. And take it from my personal experience. Like I said, I'm somebody who's dealt with loans. I got very little left right now, and I'm very happy to say that. But over the past couple of years, it has been one of those things I just look at and be like, what do I do? And now, like I said, I'm trying to bring the information to you guys so you can stay aware of what's happening, these changes. How do we even get here? And know that, okay, should we be making some different decisions going forward? Some of you might have kids and say, okay, well, am I planning to send my kid to college? Is there another path for them to take? What should I do? Right? A lot of people asking questions about these things, and I'm interested to know what you guys think. Do you still think that college is something that everybody should be doing? Or do you think there's plenty of other ways, right? Should people start looking at trade schools? Should they look at more internship programs like what I was talking about with Palantir and Apple? What do you think? Let me know, right? Because I'm going to be tuning into what's going on here. Obviously, the Trump administration is really pushing to get this loan situation figured out, and I want to see what they come up with over the next couple of years. So, like I always say, stay tuned, stay curious, and as always, enjoy your first sip.